Hello and welcome to the Media and Sound booths. I just wanted to record a short tutorial video on how to use Pro Tools within the booths. This will be helpful for some of our labs and also hopefully if you're working up here on your own. And I'm going to introduce every piece of equipment in the audio workflow in here, and I'm going to introduce it in terms of its signal path, sometimes called its signal flow. And what that means is that we're going to look at the equipment in the order in which sound and audio signal hits it. The concept of signal path or signal flow is quite a useful thing to think about in audio terms. For one thing, if you have a problem with your equipment and you don't seem to be able to get sound into your recording device or maybe sound back out of it, if you check each piece of equipment in order of its signal flow from the first thing the sound hits to the last thing, then it's a methodical way of going through each piece of equipment and cable and checking that they're connected properly and working properly. For another thing, a lot of equipment that we use in audio has different controls on it, things like the gain or loudness level of the signal, or the pad or filter controls which allow you to manipulate the frequencies that you're recording and capturing and listening back to. And checking those items in order of signal path is a good way of making sure that no equipment is fighting with any other piece of equipment in the signal path. So for example, if you find that your recording levels are really low, checking whether the microphone itself has a gain control, sometimes called a pad, on it, and checking what level that is set to could be really helpful. So you might have a scenario where you turn one gain control all the way up in your audio workflow, but discover that your signal's still really quiet. And then it turns out that the pad is switched on the microphone and the mic is actually turning the signal down a lot itself. And checking that throughout the signal flow is a really good way of making sure you don't encounter problems like that. So we're going to start at the very beginning with a microphone. This is a Shure SM58. These are quite rare to see in the world of post-production and production for television, but since they're really robust and I'm working with one hand because my other hand is on the camera, I'm going to use this mic just in case I drop it. So the microphone is item 1 in the signal flow or the signal path, and the cable for it is item number 2. And I'm going to plug this into the wall box just here, so called because it's a box you find on the wall. Now the media booth wall boxes, only sockets 1 and 2 work as inputs. The rest aren't connected, and I'll show you why in a minute. If you're working in a studio, you'll be able to use more sockets, but we'll get to that when we come to working in the studios. For now, I'm going to plug our mic into wall box 2. That seems ridiculous. Why not plug it into wall box socket 1? It's just because I want to show you how to change which socket Pro Tools is listening to. So ordinarily, if you were working with one mic, you would just plug into socket number 1, but I don't want it to do that. I want to show you some slightly more useful features in Pro Tools for recording. So I plug into socket 2, and the wall box connects to the next item in our signal flow, which is this, the audio interface, which you may well have seen before. So the audio interface is so called because it's the interface between all of the analog equipment in our signal flow, i.e. microphones and loudspeakers, and all of the digital equipment, in this case just the computer. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to here is the inputs. It's only got 2 inputs, and that's why only the first 2 sockets on the wall box work, because they're connected to 1 and 2 here. Right next to that, we have the microphone gain controls and the phantom power. If you're working with condenser microphones, that needs to be switched on or they won't work. And then these 2 gain controls here, number 1 and 2, control the signal loudness effectively of the microphone plugged into socket number 1 and socket number 2. Something else that's worth looking at is the monitor path just here. So this monitor control is what drives the loudness of our loudspeakers, but we're also able to mute the loudspeakers. If you end up recording in the sound booths, whenever you hit the record button, you need to make sure the speakers are muted. Otherwise, the audio you're trying to record is going to come back out of the speakers, go into the microphone and cause feedback and all sorts of weird sound. But luckily, when the monitor speakers are muted, you can plug a pair of headphones in here or here to be able to actually hear what you're working on still. So I'm just going to, since we're plugged into socket 2, turn up gain control 2 by some amount. At the moment, I don't really know what that's going to look or sound like in a recording because I've not got Pro Tools open. Pro Tools being the final part of the recording signal path. So let's switch to the computer and look at Pro Tools. So I'm going to click on the friendly purple Pro Tools icon and wait for it to load. Pro Tools is loaded and I'm just going to go File and Create New to make a new project. And here you can name the project. I'm going to call this Media Booth Demo. And you can pick whether to store it in local storage or whether to collaborate over the cloud. This is something we won't be doing in this module, but it's one of the more powerful features of Pro Tools is the fact that people from all over the world can collaborate on the same project. And it gets used in really big budget films like Lord of the Rings and things like that. The next important thing to look at, and this does matter to us, is the file type that we're using down here. So .wav is our default and we want to leave it on .wav. Our sample rate should be 48 kilohertz and our bit depth should be 24-bit. The reason for that is it's the industry standard for sound for film. It's also Blu-ray quality audio, in case you were wondering. And the input and output settings I'm going to just leave on last used for now. That's different if you're working in the studio, so remember this video only applies to working in the sound booths. Finally, I'm going to leave it on prompt for location so that I can pick where I want my project to be saved. I'm going to hit create and now I'm going to pick where to save it. I'm going to save it on data and I've already created my own folder here. The reason I'm saving on data is because external hard drives are not anywhere near fast enough for Pro Tools to use. Unfortunately, you need to work on your local data drive on the computer you're working on and then copy your project to your hard drive to keep a backup of it. If you try and work from an external hard drive or USB drive, eventually the project will get so big that Pro Tools won't be able to read and write to that disk fast enough and you'll get all kinds of weird errors. So that's really important. Work on the local data drive. Do not work on the desktop because at midnight everything that's on the desktop gets automatically deleted. Okay, so I've opened Pro Tools and there are two windows that we tend to work in Pro Tools the most, two workspaces. One is the edit window where you edit and one is the mix window where you make controls in terms of recording and also processing the audio once it's been recorded. To see them, if you can't already, you just click on the window menu and pick mix or edit. So I want to see the mix window and it's popped up on the other monitor, but here it is. By default it's blank and that's because at the moment there's no audio in Pro Tools because I'm about to make my first recording. So to record some audio, I'm just going to click track new and I'm going to make one mono recording because I've got one microphone plugged into one socket, so that's mono, and an audio track. And if I hit create, there it is. So every time you make a new microphone recording to a new track, one of these columns will pop up in the mix window. Loads of the stuff on here we're going to ignore today because we'll be looking at it in labs. But what I do want to show you, and we will reiterate this when we're working in the studios, what I do want to show you is this input and output section here in the middle. The output by default will point to the speakers in the room that you're using, but the input is the thing we're interested in. This is which microphone socket on the wall box Pro Tools is listening to. At the moment, it's set to input 1 by default because this is the first track we've created, but if you remember, I actually plugged the microphone into socket 2. So if you do need to change it, you can just pick a different input here. And right now, Pro Tools is listening to socket 2. And if I hit the record arm button and input monitoring and pick up the microphone and speak into it, we can see that we're getting some level from Pro Tools. So it's coming in. Now I can adjust the gain control for this channel, for this wallbox input, until I think that signal is nice and loud and healthy. And I tend to like to see the signal peaking somewhere around -10 dB. If it's too loud, you'll see that little red pip light up there and tell you it's clipping. That's bad. We never want that to happen during a recording. So right now, I've got the audio peaking somewhere oh, somewhere really close to 0. I can adjust this away until eventually this little yellow peak indicator hits about -10. There we go. And I can just hit record. Now by default, Pro Tools doesn't record until you've record armed a track by clicking this red button, record armed the software by clicking this button here, and then clicked play. It seems like a faff, but the reason it does it is simple. If you've got a huge project worth hundreds of thousands of pounds and you accidentally press record on the wrong channel, you've just lost potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds. So Pro Tools likes to make sure that you are sure you want to record before you start. If I hit play, it will then start recording and all of our record indicator buttons go solid. So right now Pro Tools is recording this signal that's coming in. When I'm done recording, I hit stop. And you're probably thinking, where is the audio? Well, if we want to actually work on it and edit it, we just bring up the edit window, and there's that piece of audio I just recorded. Simple. I realized there was a lot of information in this video, and the fact is that the only way to memorize this stuff is to practice it. So it's handy to have this video here the first few times you have to record in the booths, just to remind yourself of how that works. I hope this wasn't too hard to follow, and remember, if you need any help, you can always find an audio technician. Their email address and office location is in the module handbook. And if you're lucky, you might even be able to find me outside of a classroom and get my help. Thank you very much.